Scientists are investigating shocking footage from Antarctica showing a mysterious giant pale humanoid creature beneath the Southern Ocean.
Scientists investigating Antarctica expected to study ice, shifting currents, and some of the harshest weather on Earth. Instead, a handful of researchers and crew members claimed they witnessed something that should not have been there at all. Deep beneath the freezing surface, they described a massive pale figure unlike any known marine animal. The footage they captured was blurry, the conditions were terrible, and no one could prove exactly what they had seen. Yet one unsettling question refused to disappear. What if the most mysterious legend ever linked to Antarctica did not begin with internet rumors, but with people who spent years working in the loneliest ocean on the planet? Somewhere beyond the world's southernmost shipping routes lies an ocean so unforgiving that even experienced sailors treat it with respect. The Southern Ocean wraps completely around Antarctica, forming an endless ring of freezing water where powerful winds travel thousands of miles without interruption. With no major landmass to slow them down, these winds create enormous waves that can continue for days without mercy. This is not just another dangerous sea. It is one of the least explored places on Earth. The water temperature rarely climbs above freezing. If someone falls overboard, survival is measured in minutes, not hours. Rescue is often impossible. There are no nearby cities, almost no regular shipping lanes, and vast regions where a person could travel for days without seeing another vessel. At night, the isolation becomes something entirely different. Veteran crew members often describe a silence so complete that it almost feels unnatural. Once the engines slow and the wind briefly settles, there is nothing left except black water stretching endlessly into darkness. No aircraft overhead. No distant lights. No sounds except your own heartbeat. It is the kind of environment where every movement catches your attention. And according to several accounts, that is exactly where the sightings began. Long before social media turned strange stories into viral mysteries, workers stationed in Antarctic waters occasionally spoke about seeing enormous pale shapes beneath the surface. Most never reported the encounters publicly. Some mentioned them only years later after leaving their jobs. Others reportedly refused to discuss them at all. At first, every witness thought they already knew the answer. Floating icebergs come in every imaginable shape. Some resemble mountains. Others look like walls, arches, or broken towers drifting silently through the sea. Spotting another chunk of pale ice barely registers after months working around Antarctica. But these witnesses claimed something happened that instantly shattered that explanation. The white shape moved. Not with the waves. Not with the current. It traveled in its own direction. That single detail is what transformed an ordinary observation into one of the strangest legends ever associated with Antarctica. Because ice has no purpose. It drifts wherever wind and current carry it. A living creature chooses. Imagine standing watch during the endless gray twilight of an Antarctic morning. The sky and ocean blend together until the horizon almost disappears. Everything is the same faded color. Your body is exhausted after hours in freezing temperatures. You glance toward what appears to be another slab of floating ice, then look away for only a few seconds to check your equipment. When you look back, it is somewhere else. Not floating. Moving. Against the current. That is the moment nearly every version of this story shares. Witnesses claimed the object maintained a steady course while everything around it drifted naturally with the water. At first, they questioned their own eyes. Fatigue can play tricks on anyone. Extreme cold affects concentration. Distance distorts perspective. So they did what experienced professionals always do. They called someone else over. A second crew member looked. Sometimes a third. According to these accounts, the others saw it too. Whether the witnesses were correct or mistaken, this shared observation became the foundation of everything that followed. And surprisingly, the story does not begin with conspiracy theories. It begins with honesty. Because despite decades of rumors, there is still no scientifically verified evidence that such a creature exists. No recovered skeleton. No DNA sample. No confirmed biological tissue. No marine biologist has ever identified an unknown giant humanoid species living beneath Antarctic waters. That fact matters. It deserves to be stated before anything else. Everything you are about to hear comes from witness reports, photographs with uncertain origins, and one internet legend that grew far beyond its mysterious beginning. Yet even after acknowledging the lack of proof, something unusual remains. The descriptions hardly change. Different crews, different years, different nationalities. Yet many accounts describe remarkably similar features. An enormous pale body, broad shoulders, long arms, a shape disturbingly close to that of a human. Eventually, the legend gained a name. Not from Hollywood, not from Western folklore, but from Japan. The creature became known as the Ningen. The word itself simply means human being. That may sound harmless until you stop and think about it. When sailors throughout history encountered unknown creatures, they usually gave them names that created distance. Sea serpent, leviathan, kraken, monster. Those words separate us from whatever lives beneath the waves. But Ningen does the opposite. It suggests familiarity, something that resembles us. And perhaps that is why the legend became so difficult to forget. Because people are remarkably good at seeing human shapes where none actually exist. Our brains evolved that way. Psychologists call this tendency pareidolia, the natural habit of recognizing faces and human forms in random patterns. We see faces in clouds, tree bark, mountains, electrical outlets, even the front of cars. It is a survival instinct. Throughout human history, mistaking a shadow for another person was far safer than ignoring a real threat hiding nearby. One false alarm cost almost nothing. One missed predator could cost everything. Now place that instinct inside one of the harshest environments on Earth. Exhaustion, freezing temperatures, low visibility, an endless gray ocean. Under those conditions, the human brain naturally begins searching for familiar patterns. And sometimes, it finds them. Does that completely explain the Ningen? Not necessarily. Because supporters of the legend point to something else entirely. They argue that experienced Antarctic crews spend years identifying whales, seals, drifting ice, and every natural feature the Southern Ocean can produce. These are not tourists seeing strange shadows during a sightseeing cruise. Many are researchers, fisheries observers, survey specialists, and professional sailors whose jobs depend on correctly identifying exactly what they see. Someone who has watched whales for 10 years rarely mistakes one for something impossible. That is one reason believers continue taking these reports seriously. Not because the evidence proves the creature exists, but because the witnesses knew those waters better than almost anyone alive. And according to several of them, what they saw was definitely not a whale. It was too pale, too large, and most unsettling of all, it did not move like any known marine animal. Instead of rolling through the water like a whale surfacing for air, witnesses described slow, deliberate movements that reminded them of a swimmer changing direction. Not fins, not flippers, a body pivoting around a torso, a movement disturbingly familiar. Once that thought entered their minds, they could no longer stop looking for details. And that is when the descriptions became even stranger. Some witnesses claimed they could distinguish what looked like a rounded head above broad shoulders. Others described long pale appendages hanging beneath the water. A few even insisted they saw something resembling hands. 5 long fingers slowly opening and closing beneath the surface. Whether those observations were accurate or simply the product of distance, lighting, and imagination remains impossible to determine today. But for the people who reported seeing them, those images stayed with them long after they left Antarctica. And this is where the mystery takes its most unsettling turn. Because if multiple experienced crews truly believed they had witnessed the same impossible shape, why has no one ever managed to prove it? If the Ningen truly exists, then somewhere in the Southern Ocean there should be undeniable evidence. A creature supposedly reaching the length of a ship could not remain invisible forever. It would leave behind bones, tissue, DNA, or at the very least, a series of clear photographs taken by modern research expeditions. But that evidence has never appeared. Instead, what exists is something far more frustrating. A collection of blurry images, old photographs with uncertain origins, anonymous witness reports, and one famous satellite image that believers have debated for years. The satellite picture appears to show an enormous white figure lying just beneath the surface near Antarctica. At first glance, it almost resembles a gigantic human body drifting through the water. Supporters immediately declared it proof. Skeptics reached a completely different conclusion. Experts pointed out that satellite imagery frequently produces visual distortions caused by sunlight reflecting off water, compressed image data, moving ice, or unusual angles. Without the original data or independent verification, the image simply cannot confirm anything. The same problem affects nearly every photograph connected to the legend. Each image is just clear enough to spark curiosity, and just blurry enough to prevent certainty. Ironically, that uncertainty may be the biggest reason the legend continues to survive. If the photographs were perfectly clear, the mystery would probably be over. Either scientists would identify an unknown species, or they would explain exactly what people had mistaken for one. Instead, every image leaves enough room for imagination to finish the story. That raises another question. Where did the legend actually come from? Surprisingly, not from Antarctic research stations, not from government archives, and not from ancient folklore. The modern version of the Ningen story began spreading during the mid-2000s on anonymous Japanese internet forums. Users claimed that friends or relatives working on Antarctic research vessels had witnessed gigantic pale humanoids beneath the surface. Every retelling added another small detail: a larger body, longer arms, a closer encounter. As the story spread across the internet, it gradually transformed from an obscure rumor into one of the world's most famous Antarctic mysteries. Normally, that would be enough to dismiss it. Internet stories grow larger every time they are repeated. But supporters argue that one aspect remains difficult to ignore: consistency. Across different versions of the story, certain details appear again and again. The creature is always described as pale, always enormous, always humanoid, always seen in Antarctic waters. Believers ask a simple question. If people were inventing the creature from scratch, why would so many describe almost the same thing? Why not tentacles? Why not a giant serpent? Why not something completely alien? Why does the image almost always return to a gigantic human form? Science actually has an answer for that. Because human beings naturally interpret unfamiliar shapes by comparing them to the one body they know best: their own. It happens constantly. We see faces in the moon, animals in clouds, human figures in shadows. The more uncertain an image becomes, the harder our brains work to complete the missing pieces. That explanation is supported by decades of psychological research. But there is another argument often raised by believers: the ocean itself. Despite centuries of exploration, humanity still knows surprisingly little about the deep sea. More than 80% of Earth's oceans remain either unmapped or only roughly explored. New species are discovered every single year. Some are tiny, others are unexpectedly large. The giant squid, for example, remained a legendary sea monster for centuries before scientists finally confirmed its existence. Several deep-sea sharks were unknown until remarkably recently. Even today, research submarines regularly encounter creatures unlike anything previously documented. So is it possible that the Southern Ocean still hides unknown life? Absolutely. Scientists themselves would agree. But possibility and probability are not the same thing. Finding an undiscovered fish thousands of meters below the surface is one thing. Finding a 30-meter humanoid repeatedly swimming beside research vessels is something entirely different. That distinction changes everything. The deepest parts of the ocean are excellent hiding places because almost nobody ever visits them. But the reported Ningen sightings happen near the surface, where ships travel, where satellites pass overhead, where cameras exist. If such an enormous creature regularly surfaced for decades, eventually someone would capture undeniable evidence. Not one blurry image. Thousands. Researchers from multiple countries constantly study Antarctica. They monitor whales, penguins, seals, sea ice, weather systems, and ocean currents using satellites, aircraft, underwater drones, and research vessels. A giant surface-dwelling humanoid would almost certainly appear somewhere within those observations. Yet it never has. That reality leads many scientists toward a much simpler explanation. Ice. Antarctica produces some of the strangest ice formations on Earth. Wind sculpts towering ridges. Waves carve smooth curves. Melting changes familiar shapes into something almost recognizable. Viewed from hundreds of meters away through snow, fog, and low light, an unusual iceberg can easily resemble something alive, especially when it appears to move. Remember, the ocean itself is never still. Waves rise and fall. Currents twist beneath the surface. Perspective changes every second as a ship rocks back and forth. A drifting iceberg can briefly appear to move independently even when it is simply responding to different layers of current. Add exhaustion, freezing temperatures, poor visibility, and a brain evolved to recognize human forms, and the illusion becomes surprisingly believable. That explanation may not sound exciting, but nature has fooled experienced observers many times before. History is filled with mysterious sightings later explained by unusual weather, optical illusions, unfamiliar animals, or misunderstood natural phenomena. Sometimes the truth is less dramatic than the legend. Sometimes it is even more fascinating, because the real mystery may not be hiding beneath Antarctic waters. It may be hiding inside the human mind itself. Why are we so determined to find something that looks like us? Perhaps because nothing captures our imagination more than seeing our own reflection somewhere it should never exist. Not in the clouds. Not on another planet. But staring back from the darkest ocean on Earth. Whether the Ningen is simply an internet myth, a misunderstood iceberg, a trick of perception, or something science has yet to discover, one fact remains undeniable. Antarctica continues to remind us how little we truly know about our own planet. We have mapped distant worlds with incredible precision. We have photographed galaxies billions of light years away. Yet vast portions of Earth's oceans remain unexplored, silent, and hidden beneath miles of freezing water. That mystery alone is enough to inspire stories like this. And perhaps that is why the legend refuses to disappear. Not because the evidence proves a giant humanoid exists, but because the unknown has always been one of humanity's greatest fears. The Ningen forces us to confront a simple but uncomfortable possibility. What if there are still places on Earth where certainty simply does not exist? So now the question passes to you. After hearing the evidence from both sides, what do you believe these witnesses actually saw? A strangely shaped iceberg? A powerful psychological illusion created by one of the harshest environments on Earth? Or something that science simply hasn't identified yet? Whatever your answer, one detail deserves the most attention. Not the blurry photographs. Not the internet rumors. But the fact that some of the world's most remote places continue to produce mysteries that challenge everything we think we know. Because history has repeatedly shown that the greatest discoveries often begin with someone seeing something that everyone else dismissed. The only difference is, most mysteries eventually receive an answer. The Ningen still hasn't.